really this focus on helping myself and other people sort of like bridge that beheadedness, that mind and
Mm.
body gap, and help myself and others get in touch with these like fleshy, tender, soft parts of ourselves that have been hardened because of life.
Hello, print friends, and welcome. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. Each week, I chat with artists who use print based media to do something beyond the expected. This is a bilingual podcast, so if you subscribe to us, you'll be getting episodes in English with me, as well as in Spanish with Ronaldo Gil Zambrano, printmakers around the globe about their practice and passions in the world of printmaking. And print friends, you may have already heard this already, but I have exciting news. I am hosting a print event, an in real life print event. I'm partnering with Print Austin, and I'm bringing a month-long printmaking celebration to Santa Fe, New Mexico, called What Else But Print Santa Fe. The addition of this new kid on the block Print Fest means that this year you can apply for juried exhibitions in a 2-for-1 deal. Your application to the 5x5 exhibition or the contemporary print means you're throwing your hat in the ring to be shown at Print Austin and Print Santa Fe. The 5x5 exhibition features 5 works from 5 printmakers and is more of a deep dive into their practice, while the contemporary print is a larger survey full of the exciting things happening in the print world. This is a great way to get involved with your print community and get your work under the eyeballs of some influential print people. So check out the link for the show notes. The call is open now through November 1st. Hello Print Friend is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, currently offering possibly the best thing to happen to relief printmaking, the Woodzilla presses. Beautifully made in the Netherlands, these uniquely engineered presses perfectly combine superior craftsmanship and performance at a price that keeps them accessible whether you're a seasoned printmaking pro or new to the craft. Available across 5 sizes, each Woodzilla press is precisely manufactured from heavy-duty steel and designed to apply uniform pressure without undue work or stress for the artist, and it still guarantees a beautifully printed result at every reveal. Check out these beauties through the link in the show notes. My guest this week is Julia Curran. We talk about death, bodies, mental health, gender politics in the print world, autoimmune disease, the American healthcare system, our disembodied culture, and what we can do about all of it. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to get vulnerable with Julia Curran. Hi, Julia. How's it going?
Hi, Miranda. It's going great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really pleased that we've got a chance to connect and that I'm going to get to learn a little bit more about your work. As I told you off air, the wonderful Carlos Hernandez tipped me off to your work, and so I'm really happy that he did, and so we can get together and get to know each other a bit more, and we can share your story with Hello Print Friend listeners.
Oh, that's so sweet. Like I was also saying off air, it's such a delight and such an honor to be on this podcast. I'm really happy to be here with you today.
Yay. So, as you may know, if you listen to an episode or two, I always ask my guests to introduce themselves by way of the questions of who you are, where you are, what you do.
Sure. So, my name is Julia Curran. I am currently living in Los Angeles, California. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. My husband and I just moved out here a couple of months ago, loving it so far. And my background is in printmaking, but I make a lot of different things. I make paintings and like these mixed media sculptural altar pieces, but everything is sort of rooted in the practice of printmaking.
Mm-hmm. And so you said you're from St. Louis.
Yes.
And what role did art play in that part of your life growing up in that city?
I would say that, I mean, like a lot of different artists, like most artists really, and most people, let me take that back. Most people, I always made art since I was a child, and I'm
Mm.
really lucky. I have the most wonderful, supportive, loving family one could possibly ask for. And so that was really nurtured in me from a young age. My parents were always very supportive, and my drawings were around the house since since I started making them, and my parents are also very creative people themselves. They would gut rehab houses and just make them really beautiful, and they have a beautiful garden, and so, yeah, I feel like that's sort of where that terrain comes from.
Yeah, so the changing your world aesthetically and putting
Mhm.
aesthetic touches on it. Sounds like it was something that was, yeah, really intrinsic to just the formation of our young Julia. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. And so then did you just always know you were like, art school, that's where I'm headed?
So I sort of have 2 different threads of where I have always known that I'm headed, and that is making art and also practicing healing in some way. As a child, I really wanted to be a veterinarian, but then we found out that I was deathly allergic to cats, which is so
Oh,
sad.
no.
So that didn't work out, but yeah, so those are still sort of the threads that are running through my life, and I guess art has just always been a part of my life, and whether it was making angsty collages in my room as a teenager or or like tagging things in public with friends, that was definitely something, not anything too wild and crazy, but a little bit. And even, like, making mixtapes for people, like mix CDs, and then drawing really
Mhm.
elaborate designs on the covers. I went to a high school reunion a couple of years ago, and I had forgotten about that, and people actually came up to me and were like, "Oh, I still have this CD that you drew for me in freshman year." So that was really sweet. Yeah, so art has just always kind of been there, and then printmaking particularly, I have sort of the same origin story that a lot of people have. I'm an undergrad. I went to Truman State University in Kirksville, Missouri, and Jim Jareb, who was the print professor at the time, was my drawing professor, and I just loved him. He was such a wonderful professor and is such a wonderful person. And I was thinking about what I wanted my major to be and my focus to be, and I was debating between painting and printmaking. And I went in the painting studio, and the painters were a little standoffish. They're kinda working by themselves. No shade to painters, because 'cause I'm also a painter. But then I walked into the printmaking studio, and what do I see? I see a disco ball hanging from the ceiling. I see a taxidermied flying squirrel hanging from the ceiling. I see students standing on the table and dancing because they had just, like, pulled a really great etching, you know? And I was like, "Oh, yes. These are my people."
Yeah, you're like, "So this is where the party is. Okay,
This is where the party is.
yeah."
So, of course, like most of us, the community aspect of printmaking is what really, really drew me in. I love to get people together. I love to the act of gathering people and making something bigger than each one of us coming together and making big events or just acting really silly. And the printmaking studio was a place that I could do that and have this really integral part in that community.
Yeah, absolutely, and I just love that juxtaposition between the again, no shade to painters who do get thrown under the bus from time to time by printmakers, but yeah, that juxtaposition of the kind of serious and I imagine they just like oil painting. Here we are in the grand tradition of Renaissance masters
Mhm.
and then a taxidermy squirrel. Yeah, I think that's really fitting to kind of show
Exactly.
the culture around both those the mediums. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so I'm really intrigued when you said that it's the 2 threads are art making and practicing healing, because I definitely feel like those 2 actions aren't mutually exclusive.
Mm.
And I know particularly given some of the subject matter of your own work, I'm sure there's a thread through in that. I would guess that practicing healing still shows up for you in the work that you do now. Is that correct?
Yeah, how do you wanna get there? Do you wanna take the long route or the do you want me to go right to it? Because there's history
Yeah.
and biography and that.
Let's take the scenic route. We're only at 8 minutes, so we got time, Julia. Take me around the lake. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go around the lake. Our first stop is just to give you a little background of myself and just sort of like my printmaking lineage. I have so many wonderful mentors starting with Jim Jareb in undergrad, and then I had actually met Tom Huck of Evil Prints in St. Louis in high school. Our art teacher took our class there as a field trip, and it was one of the first times where I was like, "Oh yes, like here's another artist who's there's, like, some crunchiness to it that's
Ah,
also present
uh-huh.
in my own work, and he was so nice to us. I was showing him my sketchbook, and he's like, "Oh, that's cool," just, like, very kind. And so, after I had found the printmaking studio in undergrad, I thought, "Hey, I'm gonna try to go find that guy again." And so, I hunted him down through his gallery. Somehow his gallerist gave me his cell phone number, and so I so I just straight up
That's
called him, and I was
I mean,
like,
as a gallerist, like, I'm happy for you, but, like, slightly horrified, like, the
well, I went to the gallery first and I'm like, "Hey, I need a summer internship," and they're like, I don't know, they were just like, "We don't need anybody, but you know who does? Tom Huck." And I'm like,
Okay,
"That's so
gotcha,
funny, I've been trying
gotcha.
to get in touch with him." They're like, "Here's his number."
That's
And
that's a little bit better than just like, "Oh, you want the personal contact information of one of our artists? Here you go,
right, right,
strange
right.
person." Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Okay, okay,
Right,
yeah.
right, right. So, called him and Evil Prince needed an intern, and I showed up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I ended up working there for several years, became a shop manager, and again, talking about this experience of community, Evil Prince was this really it was wild and crazy, and it was sort of like the Wild Wild West. His shop manager was described as wrangling the shit tornado, and so it was really this exciting time, and what was so special about it is that with not a lot of resources, we were able to just make magic happen. We were able to make the impossible possible every day.
Mm.
So that was really special, and that was sort of like my entry point into the community of printmaking, really. That's when I first learned about SGC, was the one in St. Louis that we sort of, like, put on a parallel conference to at the same time, which was really fun. I saw Sean's Star Wars work for the first time and almost just it knocked me over. I was like, "Wow, this is this is amazing." And the amazing Hancock brothers, it was just such this great baptism into the print world. Yeah, and so after that, I actually got a Fulbright grant and moved to Paris, France, and again, sort of like continued that path of like finding different printmakers. I worked with a wonderful artist named Marc Brunier Mestas. I worked with a really cool screen print shop in Marseille called Le Dernier Cri
Mm.
and got to make really amazing screen prints. And
So,
yeah,
I just a quick question because I when I was looking at your website, I saw that you'd gotten the Fulbright and got to spend that time in Paris. Did you find that same level of community in Parisian shops? Like, could you just show up and say, "Hey, I'm a printmaker," and the doors were open and they pour you a coffee or I guess a brandy, depending on what time of day it is, and welcome you in? Is it there?
So I found that I didn't just walk into shops. I actually John Hancock put me in touch with Marc Brunet
Mm.
Mestas, who's an artist working out of a town called Clermont-Ferrand, and he's just this really trippy guy, and so he was really wonderful and welcoming and invited me to come and stay with him and make some work with him, and I didn't even know what this guy looked like. I just hopped on a train and went down. I'm like, hope he's nice."
Hope he's chill, yeah.
Oh, well, right, and I showed up at the train station, had no idea who I was looking for, and then I see this guy who's more or less bald and has a really, really long braided gray goatee, and then really long black pinky fingernails that were painted black, and I was like, "Okay, this has to be him." And so through him, I met all these other wonderful artists, both painters and printmakers and illustrators throughout France. And Mark and I actually put on a traveling exhibition showcasing French, American, and Mexican printmakers. And we got a grant and we were able to have a couple of different shows. And at the same time, Ryan O'Malley and John Hancock, Tyler Krasowski, John Hancock's wife, another guy named Big Lou, they were all in Europe for the Printmaking In Festival in Estonia. And so we were able to sort of like invite them as visiting artists, and we just all traveled around and had that really great feeling of international print community there.
Oh, that's so wonderful to hear because I've experienced it in Thailand before, just
Awesome.
showing up when Tim and I were living there. I had had some connections there from the work I'd done with Kirikang Pila Quatanotai up in Chiang Mai and Cap Studio. So we had a bit of an in, but even then, the Thai printmakers were always just so excited just to welcome us, just to have warm bodies in the shop who share the
Mhm.
passion. And Thai is a very difficult language for someone who grew up is English is a native language. So we didn't speak very much of it, and they didn't speak a whole lot of English, but, that wonderful experience of bonding over a printing bed,
Mhm.
and you don't need very many words to go through someone's flat file with them, and it's
Exactly.
such a nice way to feel really universal human connections with people who have kind of chosen this off the beaten path way to be in the art world. And so it's just every time I hear another place that can welcome printmakers under that umbrella of just shared community and the sort of shared bondage of print, it makes me happy. So I'm glad to hear that you had that experience in Paris and being able to spot another misfit at the train station like
Yes,
that
exactly.
is yeah.
Exactly. And really that theme of connection, that's what has guided me throughout my career as an artist and printmaker. Speaking of Ryan O'Malley, he's one of my dear beloved mentors, and I actually chose to go to grad school at Texas A&M Corpus Christi specifically to work with Ryan, which was a great choice. And this is sort of like where that healing thread comes back in. So like a lot of us, I had a really rough time in grad school.
Mhm.
It was a good time. Like I learned a lot. It was like a very hard-earned period of personal growth. And during this time, I was really, really ill. I have an autoimmune disease called ulcerative colitis that I've had since I was a child. And in the past, I would just sort of like go, it comes and goes in flares. And so in the
Mhm.
past, I would have a big flare. I would kind of like put my head down, get through it, get over you take a bunch of steroids, take a bunch of medicine, almost have to have really horrible surgery, but get through it and then stuff it all back down and be like, okay, I'm fine, and continue. And so this happened again in Corpus Christi. And so I experienced the stress of grad school and then also being really ill and not really having great access to medical care and
Mhm.
doctors. And this was really where I decided that I had had enough and that this process of sort of stuffing everything down, putting my head down and moving, just like plowing through things wasn't actually serving me.
Mm.
And so at this point, I started working with a naturopathic practitioner in addition to a gastroenterologist and really opened up my view of health and also
Mm.
the difference between like a quick fix or trying to quote unquote cure something that's considered incurable and healing. And
Mhm.
so it was a very intense time. It was sort of this long, long process that required not only like a reevaluation of like what I was eating and just like lifestyle and things like that, but also like my connection to my own body. This experience really it was like a several years long process, and it really sort of allowed me the space to reconnect mind and body and emotions and feelings
Mm.
and cognitive aspects. And also it made me realize how our society is really disconnected mentally and physically. Have you read the book The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der
Mhm.
Kolk? Right, okay.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
a
yeah.
bestseller for a reason.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so in the book, he talks about how we live in a dangerously beheaded society,
Yep.
and that really resonated with me. So I wasn't making work about this in grad school. I was still at the point of like, no, I don't want to talk about this. It's either too personal or it's not interesting. No one cares about me. I got to
Mm.
make like work about big important things. And that wasn't the right choice. It wasn't the way to go. And so after grad school, I really sort of gave myself the time, like a couple of years to just process that whole experience and then started making work that was sort of combining those two threads, like the art and the healing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much in there in that whole story, and so much I really connect with and really admire you taking on making work about, because in the United States of America, it is sort of an unpopular opinion that we should pay attention to anything from the neck down.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's puritanical, I don't know if it's sociological, if it's some combination of both, but it's this sense
Capitalist,
of
it's white
capitalist.
supremacist, it's
Yeah, it's
everything. Yeah.
patriarchal. I mean,
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
it's all of these big systems in play that, of course, are rooted in, like, the particularly horrendous history of the formation of this country.
It's
And
seeing bodies as like a means of production,
mhm. Yeah,
and
and
also
that's
like a amalgamation of, like, different separate parts, when in fact,
mm.
that's not how our body works. All of our systems are connected. We are all connected to each other. We are connected to our
Mhm.
environments, et cetera, et cetera.
Totally, totally, and that particular way that we have this relationship with bodies and health of, like, if your body can't be the perfect capitalist worker, it is your fault. It is because of the
Mhm,
decisions that you've made in your life, and therefore we don't need to take care of you. So it's
mhm.
like as soon as you sort of, for one reason or another, fall out of peak production, then you have no value. I mean, it's something that you can see in a lot of the attitudes around the COVID-19 restrictions.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
it came really, really forward in all of that, and the dialogues that people were having very publicly and without shame about, like, "Oh, only old people are dying. Only people with this
Right,
BMI are dying." Like, that
right,
this sort of thing that's just like they're not they're not falling into my perception of production, and so therefore I don't need to feel responsible for them just as another human being.
right, and that's the problem with ableism is that one day we'll if we're lucky
Mhm.
enough, we'll live long enough to experience disability,
Yeah, yeah,
and
and
so it affects us all.
right. Yeah, it's truly like you either get hit by a meteor at 28, or you will see your level of production go down, and so, yeah, so I really connected with what you're writing about your own work when you were touching on those points, because it is a huge issue, and as you said, it has these threads into to other major destructive forces
Mhm.
in our country, and of course in global perceptions as well. And so I guess I'd be really curious to hear a little bit about how, as you said, you realized that you were in the space to start making work about it. And art can be such an intellectually driven process. Art can exist, even though the physical making for most works of art, it happens with the body. The perception and the dialogue and the culture around the ways in which your production is going to be sort of received often happens from the neck up.
Mhm.
So, what was your process when you're like, okay, how do I take on getting at this concept that's very obviously important and personal, and also sort of knowing there might be a little bit of an uphill battle in terms of the way in which people receive art objects?
Well, I started by just trying to allow myself to make bad work,
Ah.
and I made a bunch of bad work for a really long time, and got that out of my system, I also feel
Mhm.
like everything you make is a step towards something else. So, yeah, so making a bunch of bad work was a big part of that, and doing a lot of writing. My sketchbook is just absolutely completely chock full of writing, connecting personal experiences to more universal experiences and how the personal is political and vice versa. So that definitely plays a big part in my practice. And also, I want to say teaching has been a big part of this
Hmm.
as well. I've been adjuncting for quite a long time now and have found y- that that can also be a spiritual practice just like art
Mhm.
where you're I feel like art and human connection, really art and meaningful connection, whether that's through teaching or because I think teaching can be healing too. I think that can be like a homecoming that can help us get in touch with this untouchable part of ourselves that makes us feel alive, and that's really profound. And so teaching has also been in really connecting with others has been a big part of my process, and really this focus on helping myself and other people sort of like bridge that beheadedness, that mind and
Mm.
body gap, and kind of help myself and others get in touch with these like fleshy, tender soft parts of ourselves that have been hardened for because of life.
That's such a beautiful way of putting that, and something I really connect with, and how I feel like my personal arc has mirrored that coming of age and the society as someone who's socialized female,
Mhm,
and showing those soft, squishy bits being shut down or
mhm,
attacked or undermined over and over and over again. And then I think a natural survival mechanism, as you say, is to harden those, because you're like, well, every
mhm,
time I've shown this, it's hurt. So I can't do that anymore. And then as entering my mid 30s to late 30s, recovering those, that process of saying
mhm,
like, oh, these have been buried, but they're a part of me that's a very important, and how do I now show them to the world in a way that keeps all of us safe, or in a way that's okay with it not being safe?
mhm.
Yeah. What is your process around that?
Well, I definitely look to others who have done that before me
Mm.
for strength and inspiration. Definitely women surrealist artists, Louise Bourgeois, Frida Kahlo, even
Mhm.
though she didn't really like being considered a surrealist artist, Leonora Carrington, Eileen Agar, Remedios Varo, like these are artists who also were touching on the same subject and like really thinking about intuition and archetype and myth and so that definitely is a big part of that process as well. Doing a lot of meditation, doing just yeah, I don't know, doing a lot of
Yeah.
writing and sketching. I do a lot of sketching. I try to
Mhm.
just sketch out whatever idea I have and then put it away, and then I come back to it, and I'm always combing through my sketchbook for little nuggets. But yeah, that's definitely a part of that process as well. A lot of reading, a lot of listening. I listen to so many podcasts in my studio all the time.
Yeah.
So
Do
yeah.
you have any recommendations for podcasts that sort of touch on this? If someone's hearing
Yes.
this and they're like, "Oh my god, Julia, you're blowing my mind right now. How do I begin to get in touch with this?" What do you listen to?
So my favorite podcast to listen to is On Being with Krista Tippett.
Mm. Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just starting on that one, I think they have like 20 years behind them as a
Yeah.
radio program, and so you can't go wrong. And what they do is they really just touch on the essence of like what it means to be, to exist and to be alive in our human forms. And they talk with astrophysicists and physicians and artists and poets, and yeah, that's definitely something that I'm playing all the time.
Awesome. Yeah, and I listened to it as well, and they actually released the unedited version
Yes.
and the edited version at the same time, which is really interesting. Because if I'm in love with Mary Oliver, and you get this whole experience of it all being edited, and then I loved it so much when I went back to listen to it again, I listened to the unedited version, and you hear, like, Mary being, like, kind of prickly about, like, where they're setting up the room, and it's just so
Mm.
interesting, because then you get this other element of it as well, and yeah, that's a beautiful one for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And so, in terms of how these explorations show up aesthetically in your work, what kind of imagery do you draw on, and how is it interacting with its environment to start to get into the messy, squishy, emotional bits?
So right now I'm making a series of paintings. I actually was just at a really great residency called Wasaic Project in New York this summer, and in a couple of days I'm heading to another residency called Gentel in Wyoming. And so I've been making all of these studies of these mother nature monsters. And so sort of these how do I want to describe these? They're these female figures. Sometimes they're not necessarily one gender, and they're sort of godlike, but they're not benign. They're not entirely benign.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking a lot about like natural cycles of life and death and life, and thinking of how these mother nature monster figures sort of personify, they're enacting these cycles. So you see them underground, you see them consuming detritus, you see them making weather happen, you see them interacting with different systems in nature. And so I'm really playing around with like the what a friend of mine just described as the earth to body stretch, sort of this like transformation between where our bodies begin and end, and where the external world begins and ends. And yeah, so I'm really thinking about that. I'm really thinking about like texture, and also
Hmm.
I guess incorporating printmaking processes into painting. And so for the past 2 years or so, I've been making these sculptural altarpieces that have doors that open and close very like Bosch-like, and using a lot of collage. And so using screen prints that I made and woodcuts and cutting back into them and collaging them into these paintings. And I'm definitely a maximalist in my aesthetic.
Mhm.
And so right now I'm practicing the act of holding back a little bit. So instead of having texture everywhere, thinking about like selective texture with paper and selective color, and yeah, just trying to play with restraint a little bit.
Mm. Yeah. As you were talking, it occurred to me that especially with bodies, that connection between, creation, of course, is in there. As you said, you phrased Mother Earth, right? Like this idea of
Yeah,
the
Mother Nature
the
monsters.
yeah, Mother Nature monsters. There you go. Yeah, yes, like Mother Nature and the creative force of the uterus,
Hmm.
and how it is still so messy too, right? The conception is messy, birth is messy, and that messiness of the human body is something that we're so desperate to deny. So
Hmm.
for me,
Hmm.
there's something in there about that connection between the process in which the human species reproduces and
Hmm.
multiplies and the denial of the essence of the bodies that create it and the essence of the bodies that are then born. It's a weird thing where it's like life only truly happens within like these few sterile years, right? Like,
Right.
yeah, yeah. That's so interesting.
Right now, I just completed a painting that's one of these Mother Nature monsters that's living below a lake, and she's drinking the lake, and then she's peeing out lava, and it's going up on the sides
Mm.
and coming out as 2 volcanoes. And so I'm trying to connect, like, what we consider abject that are just normal bodily functions
Right.
into these natural cycles.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that has a connection a bit to performance art, which I know you've also dabbled in. I've seen some products of more performative elements of your practice, but, you know, that my husband is also an artist. He's got his MFA, and so we go to art events and we see performance art, and with, again, no shade to performance art, we're always like fluids and self-harm. There it is again. But it's like, but I think that's one of the things that like performance art is like spit is gross only once it leaves your mouth. Like you where it starts
Mhm.
to sort of question the way in which we interact with bodies, when of course bodies are the medium through which the art's being produced. So I think this is a great opportunity, a great segue, a long form segue to say, tell us a little bit about the performance aspect of some of your practice.
Sure. So it's been a long time since I've done performance. I really only dabbled in it in grad school. But it was a really special time. So my MFA thesis exhibition in 2015, again, a long time ago, 7 years ago, was like a community affair. And so it was this humorous satirical work about toxic masculinity, and it involved these half men, half donkey figures. The origin story behind that is that when I turned 18, as a joke, my friend gave me like a Play Girl magazine, which is
Uh-huh.
very silly and heteronormative and just very silly. And the centerfold was called Party Boy, and it was this man sticking his dick into cakes and a pin the tail on the donkey game, and it
I
was just
mean, can I think of anything hotter? I don't, yeah.
endless endless jokes with that one. And so I took some of that imagery and created this character called Party Boy, and he sort of represented these different hypermasculine, toxic masculine tropes. And Ryan was encouraging me to consider performance art and make it come alive. I made like this big 20-foot painting that's again is very Bosch like, and I was able to convince 8 of my graduate school friends to each take on a different persona of party boy, like this different toxic masculine persona. So we had like the frat boy, we had the roid rager, we had the warmonger, we had Lars Roeder was wearing a golden speedo and burst out of a cake, and it was
Lars,
it
the
was
ultimate party boy.
Lars
Yeah.
was the ultimate party boy, yeah, and so it was really a lovely experience. I don't know if it was good performance art, but it was a wild time.
Mhm.
We had a lot of fun. There was a ton of weed, like, Ryan O'Malley put together, like, this printmaking event that weekend, so there was a lot of people in town. The gallery was totally packed. It was at this great space in Corpus Christi called K-Space. They're wonderful, wonderful people who run that gallery, and, yeah, we pulled it off, and it was really fun. And leading up to that, like, since the work was really ambitious, like this really huge painting, it was all screen printed collage material that I just would have like weekly print parties in the print shop, and I'd buy everybody beer and pizza, and everyone would screen print with me and cut out all these collage pieces and make masks. And it was like, that's again going back to this idea of community and printmaking. It was
Mm.
just so much fun. Yeah, so again, I don't know if the performance, if that's something I'm going to continue, at least that piece, but the experience was great. I love bringing people together to do silly things, and that was really, really a lovely
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, and it's I could see it finding its way back into your practice just because of the nature and the embodied nature of your work and the corporeal experience that
Mhm. And
performance
the
might be,
mischief as well.
the moxie and the playfulness and
Yeah,
all of that
absolutely.
energy for sure. I'm curious if you've ever thought about, not that the this is me like trying to bring like these threads together into this idea I was sort of having about your work, and I hope it makes sense, but it has to
Yeah,
do
go
with
for it.
sort of like bodies and the messiness of the existence of bodies, and both in their reproduction and also in their decay and in
Mhm.
their ability to, hmm yeah, so it has to do with like the bodies and how it's like anything they do that involves creation is messy, or
Mhm.
reproduction is messy, and that's sort of what the body does, whether it's growing pubic hair, right? Like, oh no, like the body's off doing something right now, like,
Mhm.
or sex or death or various labels, areas of disability that, as you said, is an inevitability with those of us who are lucky enough to age. And somewhere in there that I'm trying to get to, that's been floating around in this amniotic sac of my my mind right now, is printmaking as reproduction, and printmaking as
Oh,
messy, and
yes.
printmaking as a means of reproduction
Mhm.
that gets complicated and uncontrollable. Uh,
Yes.
yeah.
I love that. I'm stealing that for my next proposal I write. Thank you.
Oh, good. Yeah, yeah, and so it just seems sort of fitting that part of the your process really involves this messy method of reproduction, yeah, as well. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I love that you pointed that out, because that is what's so fun about printmaking, like, the actual process is the experimentation
Mm.
and trying different avenues and making a mess. And, yeah, I have definitely been told a few times that I need to clean it up when I'm printing and fingers all the time. But, yeah, that's a really great connection between those 2. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, yeah, good, I'm glad. I was like I said, like, I didn't even have a question, but it just was something that my brain couldn't let go of when thinking about, coming to understand your practice and thinking about how it's happening, so I'm excited to see the next project, the printmaking reproduction. So, I think as I mentioned to you when I first sent you the email, that we're doing this Outlaw October in the Hello Print Friend universe.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because I feel like the Outlaws were a side of the printmaking culture that I became aware of pretty early on in my own indoctrination into contemporary printmaking.
Mhm.
It's something that I think as I've come to understand, has to do with taking printmaking out a bit of its from its, like, academic ivory
Mm.
tower, is
Yes.
sort of the strongest definition I can think of. But as someone who is on the official list of outlaw printmakers, that which as far as I know exists on the Wikipedia page, I don't know how else to find it. What does it sort of mean to you to be under that umbrella, and what you think of as having being a part of this side of contemporary printmaking?
Since one of my first experiences in printmaking was working at Evil Prints for a long time and getting to work with some of my favorite artists like Dennis McNett and John Hancock and Sean Starwars was is great. You know, that feels really good because I appreciate their aesthetic so much. And I love the way that you described it as like getting printmaking out of the ivory tower of academia. No shade to academia or learning, but traditionally printmaking is something because of the expense and, you know, and just the cumbersomeness of it, that it has an easier time existing in institutions than outside of them. And so what I love about the outlaw printmakers and that spirit is making the impossible possible, making
Hmm.
printmaking happen outside of an institution. And I'm all about being outside of institutions. So that, yeah, that part feels really good. I don't know. I don't really like, I feel like a very peripheral part of that group. So what we were saying earlier about the outlaws, like this sort of like anti-institution sentiment is, oh man, I don't know if I want to even say anti-institution, like, because like we're at a moment of crises where we need trust in institutions, but like
Right.
these like but you know, like not necessarily like questioning if rules are like serve us or not, and sort of like existing outside of a norm. And really, when you think about it, like existing outside of this like Judeo-Christian norm, like that is part of the outlaws and what makes them so special and what makes me happy to be associated with that movement. But it's true, my work is a lot different. I have a couple different thoughts about this. First, like that like rebellious spirit, like that's something that's really strong within me. And like that mischievous spirit is something that's
Mm.
really strong within me and within my work. And so that's one way that I really resonate with that like yang essence, as you're saying, or like that typically considered more masculine part. That's definitely like a part of me as well. And I also feel like I jokingly say this after working at Evil Prince for many years. I'm not cut out to work for anybody. Let's just say it
Mhm.
like that.
Yeah.
I'm only cut out to work for myself. I devote my life to molding it around my freedom, never working for anybody, but especially never working for a man ever again. And so sometimes I feel like what I've been able to do in my work is sort of like take this really wonderful like rebelliousness that I sort of that's my printmaking lineage and turn it into my own
Mhm.
without yeah, and turn it into my own. Like, I mean, I feel like my work always has a thread of like making fun of toxic masculinity. And I definitely a couple times that I have shown with the outlaw printmakers in different panel talks, I have been able to like humorously comment on some of the gender dynamics that were happening that weren't necessarily like balanced
Mhm.
to put it nicely, while still like embracing like the wonderful parts of the outlaw printmakers. And so yeah, so I feel like my own work, yeah, I don't know if I answered that question
Yeah,
correctly.
yeah, for sure. And what actually sort of is occurring to me is that I think when people are critical of the outlaw printmaker ethos, it
Mhm.
has to do with some of the things we've talked about, like the perception of toxic masculinity, the perception of the boys club, that kind of thing. And there's Catherine Polk, there's Erica Walker, there's Suko, there's other
Amazing
women,
artist who I love
amazing,
so
amazing,
much.
amazing
I have
artists.
a wall behind me if you can see that.
Yeah. I do recognize it actually, yeah.
And so I think like when we're talking about like traits that are considered like typically masculine or typically feminine, like I mean it's 2022. Come on, I think we all we
Mhm.
should all don't know by now that we can embody many different traits and not have to have ourselves or our as artists our work be like quote unquote feminine or quote unquote masculine. And so I feel really good about. Like sometimes like my work is a little aggressive, and even though it's about like greater topics of like of like finding that like softness and like embracing like our fleshy and an abject existence, like my work is not benign. Like
Mm.
it's not benign. There's an element of revenge in these figures. Like a print I recently completed at Graphic House in St. Louis is one of these Mother Nature monster figures who's literally underground and then eating corpses out of coffins and then shitting out their bones, and then like and then there's like new plants that are growing. And so like that is like that image is a bit aggressive. But at the same time, I feel like the moment we're living through is aggressive in so many,
Yes.
and I feel like the
Mhm.
antidote to that is like getting more in touch with like allowing ourselves to be
Mhm.
soft through connection and through beauty and yeah, and embracing that aspect of ourselves.
I believe that human beings want connection, and I believe that
Oh, absolutely.
printmakers want connection, and that sometimes those of us who wear the strongest armor are those of us who want it the most.
Of course, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Mhm.
Those of us who wear the strongest armor are those of us who want and need connection the most. Absolutely. And I also
Yeah.
wanted to mention too, when we're talking about our soft and squishy bits and like this tenderness, I feel like that's also where strength lies in embracing that part of ourselves and in embracing each other as well.
Yes.
Recently, when I was in Wasaic, had the God, it was this amazing time. It was like being at adult art summer camp. And I had two fabulous roommates, one who's a printmaker, Joanna Kamborian in Australia, and another who's a sculptor named Lauren Ruth. And we would just like sit down and have nights where we like fleshed out each other's artist statements. And when we were talking
Mm.
about my work, I kept saying like sometimes I feel a lot of shame about my work, and because I we all do, but because I have this like this a part of me that has this fear that I'm always too much. I talk too much.
Mm.
I have too many needs. I need connection too much. My work is too much. And so that's like that, like when we're really getting into like these vulnerabilities and these tender parts of ourselves. When I was having this discussion with my fellow artist, the conclusion we came to was to find that part of you, that little part of you that you feel shame about and that makes you feel really like you just want to throw up and you want to whatever exit your body and leave the room, to follow that and use that as a guide in your work. And that is where the strength will come from.
Mm.
And so I'm trying,
I just
that's
wanna
like
be
a
like,
day.
"And scene." Like, I don't wanna there's nothing I can add to that. It's perfect.
But I feel like that's for me, like that to me is a daily practice of my work. And that's what I was saying. Like it's also that's like where art for me is also this really spiritual practice because it's me. For me, my art practice is visually processing internal work, if that makes sense. Not only internal, because I don't want to make it sound like it's like all art therapy, because it's not, but it's like it's visually processing both internal work and external connections, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. And actually something I wasn't sure if I was going to mention or not, but like thinking of these two paths in my life of art and healing, I actually am currently going back to school to become a therapist in private practice.
Shut the
Um
front door, so am I.
yeah. No, wait, what? No way! Oh my god, you're gonna be so good. You are gonna be so good.
So are you, shut up.
I love that. Oh my god. I love that. I am so fucking sick of being an adjunct teacher. It's like being an Uber driver professor. I'm
Yes.
over it. And that's half of my job is like, "Hey, why didn't you come to
Oh.
class today?" "Oh, okay. All right, let's get you to therapy. Let's get you to the academic resource center. Let's get you to the food bank." And I'm like, "Fuck this. I'm gonna go make some money and be a therapist." Like,
Oh my god. That's so like, I haven't talked about it on air at all because I've worried people are gonna be like, "Oh, no, is she not gonna be
exactly.
in the arts," right? But it's like
Exactly. You're the first like person in the art world that I'm telling that's not like Ryan O'Malley or is that Chavez?
And so one of the things, like, when you were talking about connection, that I wanted to say is, like, the parts of ourselves that we hate the most, that we have the most shame, are the gateways into connection with people.
Yes, yes. Oh
You
my god.
know?
Yes,
And I
absolutely.
just was like,
And
because there's nothing stronger than vulnerability, right?
I was teaching this class at Webster University in St. Louis, and I was invited by one of the professors who's been there a long time. Her name is Carol Hudson. She's a gem of a person. Oh my god, she's a performance artist and drafts person and paint. She does everything. And so she's been teaching this class called Creative Strategy for 30 years. And
Mm,
she was kind of ready to step back from it and wanted to hand it off to, like, she wanted to hand pick who she hands it off to. So she approached me and then one of my colleagues who's an excellent painter named Marissa Addisman. And she approached both of us and she was like, "Hey, I want you guys to teach this class." And what it is it's hard to describe. It's been described as bungee jumping for your brain, but it's like a foundations class for freshmen that's all about, I don't want to say it's art therapy. So Carol is also an art therapist and a
mhm.
professor. And
Yeah.
so this class, it's not art therapy, but it has that as its foundation. And
Mhm.
it's all about, like, how do you like come up with like good ideas and good content by like allowing yourself to be vulnerable in your work.
Mm.
So we do like, and what's exciting about it is that every semester the goal is that 50% of the course has to be completely new. And so it's like a lot of work to teach, but it's also really fun. Like, I became best friends with my colleague Marissa because of teaching this class together. And we do like all sorts of different wild assignments. And we also do like improv theater exercises. Like, we're looking at Augusto Boal's Theater of the Oppressed and like how to like think
Mm,
about power
mhm.
dynamics through improv exercises. And it's like very like it's very much about getting in your body and like building resilience, I want to say. And so teaching that class, like, that was such like a formative experience for me in merging like my art practice with this interest I have in healing. And I think that
Mhm.
when you're a professor and when you're an art professor, healing can take the form of helping people find their voice and
Yep.
helping people find like a safe space to be themselves. I can't tell you how many times I've had students in other classes come to me with like a whatever, like a crisis happening in their
Yeah,
lives or
yeah.
like a crisis of identity or any sort of experience like that. And I'm like, why don't you come, why don't you come to the print shop or whatever, come and hang out in whatever class I'm in. Usually I invite them to the print shop. And then it becomes this great supportive, nurturing community space where people can blossom into who they really are. And so being able to experience that in my years as a professor, both teaching printmaking and teaching even just drawing. I teach drawing from the perspective of like, hey, like, we're not Rembrandt here. We don't care about that. Like, we're just going to get in our bodies and witness and observe. That really led me to this choice during the first pandemic lockdowns of like, I just can't be a part of this exploitative system of adjuncting anymore. It's not like I can't do this my
Mhm.
whole life. And I don't even think I want to be a full-time professor. Like, it wasn't happening for me. I put out a bunch of applications and I think it wasn't happening because I don't actually want it. And so I made the decision to sort of, in what I consider like continuing that aspect of my art
Yeah.
practice and become a therapist. And I said this earlier, like, this is part of like my goal as an artist is to build my life around my freedom. And not only my
Mhm.
freedom, but also the freedom of others as well. To build my life around freedom, whether that's like finding a way that I don't have to like work for somebody else, and also
Mhm.
finding a way to help other people find their own voices and either touch people through the work I make or through a therapy session or through whatever, all of these different modalities of therapy,
Yeah.
like somatic experiencing, dramatic play, all these different things that are helping us get in touch with those fleshy bits and those vulnerable bits, which is where the strength lies.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. All of it. Yes. Yeah. So I'm really getting like a huge personal, I don't even know what to call it, like, comfort from this conversation, because
Oh, thank you.
I felt really drawn to go back to school to become a therapist myself. And that's what I'm doing. In case I cut out the part where I scream earlier. Maybe I know,
Yeah.
maybe I'm not. Just gonna make some tape for that just in case. And I've been wrestling with this anxiety of like, I know this connects to the art world. I know it
Yes.
does. And when I am having transcendent art experiences, it feels like transcendent therapeutic experiences. They feel like they're
Yes.
getting to the same place, which is what I like to call the problem of being a human.
Yes. Yes.
And I just don't know exactly how they're going to kiss. Like, I'm like, how am I gonna make this come together? And just finding in you someone who's on the same path, and it feels like you have answered that question. Like, that's just so
Oh,
beautiful
wow.
to hear that. Like, I really am, like, having quite an emotional response to it because it really is something that in my own personal locked box of my brain has been a problem I've been trying to solve. And it's a really it feels like there's a there's a thread throughout what I am drawn to in this world, and whether it's Zen Buddhism or artwork
Mhm.
or therapy or
Poetry.
poetry. Oh my gosh, Mary Oliver, like
Yeah.
who we were chatting about earlier, you know, and we're told that these things have to live separately, but like there is this through line, and I'll be in a lecture from a roshi and it will feel like therapy, and I'll be in therapy and it will feel like art, and I'll be in art and it will feel like
Yes.
meditation. Like it's all
Yes.
like it's like I feel like we're just I'm like sitting in a tree and I'm trying to cut off the branches when I feel like I have to choose, you know? And so it's just really beautiful to hear the ways in which like you have found that through line in a really wonderful way to articulate it as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I having this discussion with you is like so important for me too, because like I wasn't even sure if I was going to say that on
Mm.
this podcast because of some of the messages that I've gotten throughout my career that we all do that like real artists like gut it out. Like, oh well, you're only a
Yeah, yeah,
real artist
yeah.
if you like whatever, if you like bartend or if you are an art handler or if you adjunct and do like a part-time like low wage job that you can't fucking live on.
If you work at a nonprofit for $35,000 a
Yeah,
year.
yeah, like,
Yeah.
fuck that shit.
Mhm.
Fuck that. Sorry, you can take out all the F-bombs if you need to, but, like,
F-bombs are appropriate in this situation, that because it is the artist suffering, and that's not to say that there's
yes,
not suffering in art, but the narrative that you're not doing it right unless
if you're not
you're giving up
suffering.
everything else. Yeah.
That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous, and I really like, thank God for my amazing, beautiful husband, Roman. Like, I was really struggling with this a lot. Like, when I was applying, I was just, like, riding the roller coaster of, like, "This feels right. Like, I'm gonna do this. I can do it. Like, I know I can build my life to where I have plenty of time for my art practice and plenty of time for therapy to be a therapist and live a good life." Or, well, let's say, like, have some financial stability,
Yeah,
eh,
yeah,
which
we're not
doesn't necessarily
greedy.
for a
I
good life.
just would
Like
like healthcare,
like
honestly. Like
right. And, like, there were so many and then there was these, like, dark times where I'm just like, "Well, this is me giving up." Like, this
Mm,
is me giving
mhm.
up, like, I'm not good enough, and so, like, somewhere deep down inside me, I know that I'm not good enough, and so I'm gonna do this thing instead and give up. And, like, Roman, my husband, he's like there was a couple times where he sat me down, he's like, "Julia, you make work every single day." Like, I'm doing, like, hours and hours of homework, and then I'm going in my studio and I'm making work. He's like, "You're still showing all the time, you're still applying, you're still doing" like, I'm literally
Mhm.
about to do a residency, they don't know that I'm a student because like, no students allowed or whatever. I'm gonna be, like, secretly doing my homework and then going to my studio. I'm making it
Yeah.
work, and he sat me down and he was like, "You have more than one talent, and it would be bad for the world if you don't pursue this." I mean, that
Yes,
sounds
Roman,
very grandiose,
yes.
with me saying it, but, he's, like, such a beautiful, sweet person, and, yeah, and, like, he really has helped pulled me back and, like, reminded me, like, "Hey, like, you're multidimensional, baby, you got this."
Mhm.
So, I'm really,
Yeah.
like, the further I'm halfway through my program, the further I get into it, the more I'm able to embrace that because I'm like, "Oh, look, like." And sorry, something else that I have a lot of thoughts coming up. Like
Yeah,
something else that
yeah.
has happened is that since I made that addition, I don't wanna say switch, but since I, like, pivoted away from adjuncting towards becoming a therapist, like, it helped me give up, like, I let go of some of these, like, what we were saying, like, these toxic narratives about being, like, the
Mhm.
struggling artist, and, like, you're not legitimate if you don't whatever, if you're not, like, living on cigarettes and beer and, like, whatever, not sleeping, because that was, like, a lot of grad schools, like, who can not
Mhm.
sleep the most, like, like, I have health problems, I can't live like that.
Yeah.
So, like, once I kind of gave up some of that narrative, things started to open up for me in the art world too.
Mhm.
Like, I, like, got some really good shows and, like, sold some work through, like, good galleries and got these residencies and, like, am getting shortlisted for, like, these big prizes and stuff that I, like, wouldn't have imagined even a year ago. And so, like, that keeps reminding me, like, kind of going back to this discussion we were having about, like, following that shame, like, so it was
Mhm.
kind of like, okay, well, like, the shame part of that was that maybe I'm a failure, and that's why I'm doing this, and so I'm like, "You know what? Okay, I'm gonna go with that," and, like, instead, it's like, "Oh, no, like, not at all, it's the complete opposite, like, look at you expanding your world, and now more
Yeah,
opportunities are
yeah.
opening up to you
Yeah.
energetically."
Well, and I think there's something in there for me about, like, how, limiting identities are,
Yes.
and how the more we get locked into an identity, the less expansive we can be. And the more
Yes.
we say,
Yes.
I am an important person because X, Y, and Z. I'm an important person because I have these degrees, because I have this title, because it says gallery director, like whatever it is, right? Artist. The more we sort of cling to those in the Buddhist wheel of suffering and desire,
Mhm.
the worse off we are. And so I think this idea of like, I can't go and do this other thing because I am an artist. Like you like
Right.
you're directly experiencing the fruits of letting go of identity as I like identities in the sense of the labels that we have in this world as identity in the sense of Julia's being with a capital B.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
and being able to think that we're what we actually are is so much larger than any identity
Mhm.
that you can tap into that when you let go of them. Not
Yeah.
to not if I just lost half the audience with that level of woo, I apologize, but
No, it's not that's not woo. It's not like we're talking about, like, crystals and
Mm.
I don't know, whatever, like, perverted capitalist version of
Right,
spirituality
right,
that's
right,
popular these days.
right.
It's like that that's real.
Mhm.
That's real. Like, sometimes I don't even know how to add on to that. Yes, I hear you. Yes,
Yeah,
that's real.
yeah, and I yeah, and I think for me, I actually had a breakthrough this weekend when I was talking to a spiritual advisor that thinking about like, okay, I'm in the arts, I've had this fancy job, I've worked in Bangkok, I've worked in Sydney, my life is fancy, and like how much that identity for me was a balm for being an awkward kid that no one liked. I could look at it and I could
Yes.
be like, "Oh, like check it out. Like I must be special because all these things I have done, because of these fancy titles I've had, because of these fancy dresses from like Bangkok-based designers that I'm the only one in Santa Fe with." Like
Mhm.
all of that again that like identity drama that was like this protective shield, and I didn't
Mhm.
wanna let go of it, but then I also was reaching out for the identity of therapist as well, like, I wanted to, and how actually we can't like, it's not healthy to do either. You can't like, if you just sort of let one protective shell of identity subsume with another, you're in the
Yeah,
same
we're not
spot, you
going
actually
anywhere.
haven't
Right?
advanced, like, you're on the
You're just
treadmill,
grinding
right?
the hamster wheel. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's I think that breaking down the barriers between them, which is what you're doing, that helps dissolve the identities that come with each one of them. And then you get to be not the suffering, struggling artist and not the brilliant, transcendent therapist. You are Julia. which is like, that's like the best. That's the best you could be, right? Like, because that is your being. Yeah.
Oh, that's very, very sweet of you. And I wanted to just like give you a little virtual hug when you're talking about being an awkward child. I was listening to another episode of On Being a couple weeks ago, and it was an interview with John O'Donohue, who was like, yeah, like an Irish poet, and I think he was a priest for a while. And he like, there's a line in this interview where he talks about how everybody is an ex-baby, which is like so beautiful, right? Like it's so funny and it's so beautiful, and just like the things that we do are like the how our personalities are formed and like the paths that we take that are like survival mechanisms, right? And then I guess the work of being an adult is like to embrace that baby that we once were, like the vulnerabilities and pain and all, and tenderness and preciousness at all, and then sort of like sift through like what of our identity is working for us and what do we need to let go.
Yeah, that kind of primal love and stewardship that most people feel when looking at a small human. It's like you don't have to play by those rules anymore once that human grows up.
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to get at. Yeah.
How can we extend that same tenderness towards ourselves and thus towards others as well?
Totally. Julia, I don't even know where to go from here. I feel like we've just done it. Like, I feel like we just had an interview. Like.
If you like today's episode, we have a Patreon where you can help us keep the lights on and get bonus content like Shop Talk Shorts, where our editor, Timothy Pauschak, digs deep on materials, processes, and techniques with past guests. But if monetary support is not in the cards for you right now, you can leave a review for us on your podcast listening app of choice, or buy something from one of our sponsors and tell them Hello Print Friends sent you. But as always, the very, very, very best thing you can do to support this podcast is by listening and sharing with your fellow print friends around the world. And that's our show for this week. Next week, we're kicking off something a little different at Hello Print Friends. We're going to be doing Outlaw October, a month-long feature on outlaw printmakers and a little bit of a deep dive into who they are and what they do. We're going to be starting with Bill Fick in Venezuela and later Saudi Arabia, what makes a cartoon, high and lowbrow art, and skulls. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing by Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.